Okay, we're all here except for
Yes.
Mr. Humphrey.
Except for Ron.
Ron, I
Are we doing the Pledge of Allegiance and the GS now?
No, we don't have to.
So we do we need to amend the agenda to?
I think you should amend the
Open
agenda.
Meeting Act. Or
Yeah.
Are you making the motion?
I don't know if you can make it a motion, but, well, I called the meeting order, so yeah, go for it, make a motion.
Okay, I make a motion to amend the agenda to exclude the roll call, the pledge, and the ZIA.
Pledge? Is that what the Z?
Pledge of Allegiance
To the
and the
Z.
ZIA.
Not very American.
Okay.
We don't pledge for the NFL. All right, is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, I have a motion and a second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Approval of agenda. Need a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Awesome. I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda with the amendments made. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, same sign. Okay, consideration of minutes for May 15th, 2018.
Making sure that Colin kept me.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes from Tuesday, May 15th, 2008.
Is there a second?
A second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Public comment. Okay. Action items. Crystal.
We have 224 West Jefferson. The owners are requesting a 3-foot encroachment onto the city easement. I do believe there was photos in the packet. The owner built this without permitting first, so once he come in to actually get the permits for the porch he built on is when I discovered it was in the easement. He had originally built it thinking his property line went out to the edge of the, he has a handicap ramp and everything. It used to be a restaurant, I guess, years ago. I wasn't here when it was, I guess, so. He didn't know that wasn't his property. He has not had a survey done, so the drawing that's attached is, that is just my best estimates of where that easement would fall. So,
He's already had the concrete piece there.
Is it on here? The picture?
Yeah,
they're not.
Yeah.
Can't zoom in.
So the handicap ramp was there already, he just built the porch?
mm-hmm.
I got a handicap ramp and the step was all part of the restaurant on the roof.
Yeah, I remember that.
So the porch is within the is built within the limits of the previously existing violation.
Yes.
So he didn't violate it any more than it was already violated. Is that right?
Besides building a structure over it.
But it is attached.
Mean putting the porch cover?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because if we were to go in and redo sidewalks and things like that in that area, in that easement, we would automatically redo that handicap ramp also, so.
Just state your name and,
Oh, well, I'm translating for him.
okay,
But he's my dad. I'm Jose Vega.
okay.
And I have some pictures more, so if you want to look at them,
Sure.
of the porch.
Pass them around.
Right here, we'll pass them around. So, when you guys bought the place,
Mhm.
they didn't say anything about it being, in the city's easement?
¿Verdad que cuando compraste la casa no te dijeron nada de que estaba, según eso, pasado del city?
Es que yo compré cuando era restaurante
He bought it when it was a restaurant,
y yo saqué permiso para
but,
hacerlo casa.
but he got a permit so that he could make it into a house.
Entonces yo saqué permiso para arreglar todo para hacerlo
So
casa.
he fixed like all the place. He made rooms like into a house, you know.
You have to get your survey.
So with this being
Mine
a
doesn't.
restaurant,
It's not tuned in.
is that, I mean, it's still encroaching, correct?
Yeah.
Even if it's a business?
Yeah.
Does he have yours?
Or he's charging or whatever.
And I don't know if James knows of any or anything, but we've never done encroachments on sidewalks or ramps or anything like that to structures. It's if they build a carport or a fence or something, a structure that's above ground like that is when we get into need to grant an encroachment for them to keep it.
In the structures, the sidewalks that are normally built, typically how far in are they built? And is there, it doesn't appear to be within a normal range of where a sidewalk will be built, correct? At least in my estimation. I don't do this, so.
Yeah, there's different places in town where the sidewalk is 15, 20 foot off the curb, and that is actually property lines. There are areas in town where the sidewalk is against the back of the curb,
Right.
and the property line is right behind that.
But we
It's
don't.
just because we have different easement sizes throughout town.
Yeah, so, but on that street, do we have any sidewalks on that street other than in front of the school?
The schools, there's one across the street, they have a sidewalk that.
And how far is it, just that for a nominal?
It's about 13 foot off the back of the curb, and then the back of the sidewalk is that property line.
Is it reasonable to put the sidewalk up against the curb in that situation? Or even, would it have to, if there was mandated to put a sidewalk, would it have to be that far back?
No.
It could be, we could put a little
build
hiccup in it.
Anywhere within our easement, we put the
Mhm,
sidewalk.
mhm. And that would be the only thing that we would be looking at doing, right? Would be putting in a sidewalk or something for,
I don't know
would
if
there
we'd
be
ever
any?
widen that, because right at Third, that street does get wider. So the
Yeah, I was gonna
potential
say,
to
it
ever
gets
widen
wider.
that to match, I don't know if
Right
that
by
would
the
ever happen.
schools, it's where it gets the widest, isn't it?
Are there any utilities or anything?
But you wouldn't get any wider further down the street because isn't that the same street that the Methodist church is on?
Yes.
Yes,
So if you were to make the street wider, you'd be going into the Methodist church. So the likelihood of that street widening
is probably
is
not.
pretty slim, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But we don't have any kind of surveys on this?
Mhm.
How much does it cost for a survey?
For this one, you're probably looking at $750 to $1,500 if the corners are, if we can find, if the surveyor
If
can
you
find
can find
corners on that block.
¿Te acuerdas que te dijeron que hicieras una maquinilla? Como
Is there a
con-
home next door to this?
Yes,
And what is, do they have a sidewalk that's
No.
similar?
No.
No. It's there in the top right picture.
Well, there's already a sidewalk right
yeah, if you go to the aerial photo,
Oh, I didn't see it.
Yeah, it's right there.
there is an aerial photo also. If you go into the cover sheet on there's an aerial photo.
What page?
Yeah, I
It just says aerial photo on the cover sheet of our.
You go all the way down to the bottom.
All the way down to the bottom?
I only have 7 to 7, and there's nothing at the bottom of mine.
Mine either.
I have no
I
area.
mean, I feel ostracized.
No, don't always got it.
Right there.
Where?
But Betty does. She's got the
You
picture.
have it?
Yeah. Can you send it to me? I wouldn't be able to get it anyway. I don't have mine. I don't have my password, so.
Okay.
Well, I'm on the one that's just on the city webpage.
Me too, and I don't have it.
So, to answer your question, the curb and gutter and the sidewalk can be adjacent to each other, or they can be separated depending on the size of your right-of-way that you have. You're calling this an easement. I would venture to guess the city actually owns that, and it's considered part of the municipal right-of-way.
Mhm.
Okay. So, I don't look at it as an easement. And it's typical that the sidewalk is, in a situation like this, would actually be the property line. Would be built on the property line in a situation like this. Whether or not that sidewalk existed like that, when you have your Google Earth, I don't know if,
That sidewalk's been
Oh, I
there
guess
for
it
a
was.
while.
She needs to have a view.
on that one, can you go back in time? No. So, either way, that sidewalk was probably intended to be built on the property line. I would venture to guess, what Crystal has drawn up is going to be pretty close to what we find if you send a survey around.
So if a survey wouldn't necessarily be necessary.
Well, at the end of the day, a survey would have to be necessary for the city to grant an easement or grant an easement into that, because in my opinion, it should be a legal document.
Yeah, I think that in order to not cloud the title or cause some title issue, we have to have some document that describes that particular spot. So we've got it from a legal standpoint, can identify it. That way, if there's a question in the future, or if they sell the home and the new purchaser gets title, policy, insurance, they want to make sure the document's accurate.
Yeah.
And that there is a document.
Because then if we had the survey, we'd be able to tell exactly how much of an encroachment
Right.
we'd be granting.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, they have something that they own that sits inside of the city right away.
By how much?
By my measures, it was approximately 3 foot.
And if it actually does sit within that, I would venture to guess there's a liability issue as well. The city
I
may
hate to
wanna consider.
speculate.
Yeah. So,
Let me ask if I make sure I'm understanding. To do a survey then would therefore make this a legal document, and then thereby, when we allow, if we were to make we're trying to give them a variance, but we can't because we don't have the proper documentation. Is that the way we're kind of leaning towards?
Deny the variance based off of a legal description and whatever mandate the attorney set with respect to giving that variance. In other words, I would venture to guess it would just be a description with Northings and Eastings for how much and for how big that area is.
Right.
It's overlapped
Right.
into it, and it would be conditional on the owner. I would venture to guess if it was something this board chose to pass on to the city commission, it would be only for this owner. It would not follow the house.
What's the difference between the zone and the house? I don't follow
The
that.
owner.
The owner.
Oh, the owner, okay.
So in other words, at the time of the sale, that would have to be changed. Okay. Now, you could make the variance for as long as the facility is there. You could do it that way as well.
Well, that's with the encroachment, basically you grant the encroachment for that structure, and once that structure is at a certain, it gets damaged, and it's 50% or more damage, then that structure would be removed and the encroachment would no longer be. That's why it's not a variance, it's just an encroachment. because it's with that particular piece of that structure. It's,
I hear what you're saying.
okay.
In my opinion, you have two ways you could do the encroachment. You can do it based on the way that Crystal defined it, or you can make it that encroachment only good for the life of the owner of this facility. Once this facility, if they wanted to sell it, they would have to correct that encroachment before it could sell.
To be real honest, we don't do that. So I think option 2 is kind of like out the window.
Okay. Patrick's looking at me like
Oh, no,
No, I'm just saying that's something that we typically don't do in the city.
but you can.
Well, you can, but we're back to enforcement and everything else. And I just assume do something that's practical, that doesn't need to do dependent anything else down the road. Just get it done and over with, document it, and we give the variance for the property once it's surveyed, and then it's a legal document. It protects him and anybody else who buys the property in the future. It's done.
I hear you. And so, based on where the sidewalk is and where the beams are at, there's a really good chance that you're not into the right of way as well.
That's what I was thinking. Not that I'm an expert, but I mean, just visually. Even if they widen the street, it's still not going to be any wider. You're not even going to get to that sidewalk if you were to make it as wide as you have it beside the school. And if you did make it that wide, then we're going to eat up part of the Methodist Church.
So, do you have any other comments?
¿Tienes algún comentario?
No, pues nomás decirle que la rampa estaba allí ya y yo nomás hice algo encima de la rampa y yo pienso que lo de la rampa ya es construcción, no es construcción que yo había hecho.
He's saying that he built the porch on the ramp, you know, the cement ramp. So he thinks, piensas que es construcción o...
O sea que ya lo que estaba allí, ya el piso tiene 20, 30, 40
You know,
años.
that ramp was there before, so he thinks he's okay, you know, that he made it there.
So, did he pay cash for the facility for this?
¿Pagaste cash a la casa?
And
Sí.
there was no
Yeah.
survey done whatsoever?
Nunca te hicieron
Was the purchase title?
las medidas, ¿verdad? Ni bien. No, he paid it cash.
Sí, la Kelly me hizo
So there
todo.
was no survey done
Mm-mm.
whatsoever?
Was it just between owners?
¿Fue dueño a dueño o cómo?
Kelly fue la que me hizo todo el papeleo. Kelly.
You know, Kelly...
He went through a realtor.
Uh-huh.
He went through Cali.
They did go through a realtor?
Yes. But if you purchase the property out of cash, you don't have to do a survey.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So, el problema está en que lo que estás tratando de decir es que la rampa que ya estaba allí ya estaba en contra de lo que es. O sea, aunque ya estaba allí, de todos modos nunca pidieron un permiso para hacerlo. Aunque no fue usted, la persona que estuvo allí antes lo hizo ilegalmente. Entonces ahora agregándole el porche, de todos modos, sigue estando ilegal en términos de la distancia que tiene que estar.
Como era un restaurante,
Sí, pero
el
de todos
restaurante
modos,
están permitidos poco a
No.
poco, ¿no?
no, porque esa área de todos modos es residencial y es lo que estaba diciendo yo ahorita, que depende en la área donde estás, la banqueta va a cierta cantidad de la calle, y enfrente del negocio de ustedes está otra casa y también la casa ellos tienen la banqueta un poquito más adentro de la
Sí,
propiedad de ellos.
entonces alguien que hizo la rampa ya es muy antes.
Sí.
like that.
Y lo hacen así cuando
Isn't
no
it
piden
incumbent
permiso
upon the
ni dicen
realtor to
nada
make
a
sure that
ellos,
everything's
entonces
legal?
el problema está en que les cae a ustedes
No, it's cash sale.
ahora la dificultad.
If it's, so then in this situation, then they have assumed the responsibility and the liability for whatever happens. In this situation, they've assumed by,
she's asking a
Like
question.
you're not gonna go back and tell them to get rid of that in the steps too?
Could you repeat that, please?
He wants to know if he has to remove the porch, the cover. Does he have to remove the ramp and the steps that's already there?
Sí, porque si me quitan el porche, se cuenta que me van a quitar los escalones, ya no tengo entrada.
Because that's not part of our thing. It's just, the porch is all that we're covering.
I don't have that answer yet.
Okay. No tienen la respuesta a eso porque ahorita lo único que estaban tratando de accesar es sobre el porche, pero no tomaron en cuenta que al remover el porche todos modos queda
Pues
la
the
rampa
problem is
enorme.
La rampa tiene 20,
It's very
30
seldom
años.
is title
Yeah.
insurance purchase, very seldom is a survey done. And
Mhm.
so
Y al
people
quitarme
buy
una
that
cosa,
thinking
me
that they're
quitan
gonna be
todo.
able to do something, and then at the end of it, they figure out that there was a tank in there at one time, or, you know, there's.
Mhm. And so with the cash sale, then you assume all the liabilities once the sale's done.
Yes, you do.
And so this falls under that category, is that this is a liability that wasn't previously disclosed.
But there's an assumption that goes with that. Yes.
Well, but yeah, that's just it. That's the purpose for the survey, is to get rid of the assumptions,
Yeah.
is so you have facts.
I think having a middle person would also give you the,
You would think so. You would think so. So,
Okay, I don't know that. I don't know what realtors do.
But, you know, it's the same thing, you know, I can purchase something and I can tell whoever I'm purchasing it through.
I'm not responsible.
I don't care about that. I'll take that risk.
Okay.
And so the question that's before you is, do you want to provide the encroachment? Do you want to allow the encroachment to exist? The new encroachment. That's all we're dealing with, is the new encroachment. If you want to allow that to exist, what are the conditions that, Patrick, what are the conditions that you think would exist with allowing that, if somebody was to make a motion to approve it?
Well, I think they could approve, recommend to approve the city's recommendation is to grant 3-foot encroachment. And so then the issue would be, is that going to be tied to the building or this owner? You know, there's got to be some language in there that for some reason we come back and we do want to widen that part of the street. The obligation to remove that would be upon the homeowner at that time.
Una de las cosas en las que están preocupados es de que no sé si te has fijado en esa calle, hay una parte donde la calle está un poco más ancha que en esa parte. Eso si en el futuro no sabemos si eso es posible, pero si la ciudad quiere expandir la calle, el resto de la calle para que sea el mismo tamaño de la otra parte, entonces ahí puede que el costo caiga en la persona que sea dueño de esa casa. So, ahorita lo que están tratando de hablar y ver es si van a dar el permiso y si dan el permiso, si se lo van a dar a la casa o si va a ser más para ustedes, si ustedes la venden a futuro, la siguiente persona va a tener que arreglarle.
Did you explain your
Yeah, I was telling them what they were saying about whether if they approve the variance, if they would give it to them or if they would give it to attach it to the house.
Take this recommendation,
And then in the
future
future,
encroachment,
it's a different homeowner and they will give it to them, not to the new homeowner.
Yeah, so if you got to encourage on your side.
On like the house itself and explain about the street, how maybe, I mean, we don't know.
If we ever
If we ever
did
did,
it,
it wouldn't.
So what if we just said, we make a variance to let the existing footprint stand the way it is? And it's been that way this long, and if there's a problem on down the road, then fight that battle when it happens.
Just do what they recommend.
It's not, I mean, he just built on what was already there. I don't, as long as the structure that's on top of it's safe and secure and everything, I don't have an issue.
my hang up is just that we really don't know. It's a guess that this is a 3-foot. It's a guess that it's 3 foot from that area. It's a guess.
It's an
Is it
educated guess. Like I said, Crystal did the measurements, you took the best information that we had short of getting a survey around. Patrick, from the city's perspective, what would,
Well, I think the question you're going to ask is, should we require a surveyor to identify that particular footprint that may be encroaching? And so from the city standpoint, I think if we've got, you know, the risk to the city is that we ever need to get in there, and if we do, it's going to physically be removing whatever happens to be there. And so from the city standpoint, I don't think that survey documentation is as important. I think it's more important for the owner, because if the owner were to transfer that to somebody and they were to go through an issue with title policy and see that there is an encroachment and that there was a request made for this exception to be made, that the owner would have more of an issue with an actual document describing a meet and bound survey, identifying that footprint. So from the city standpoint, I'm not as concerned if it's not there, because we're going to be talking about some aerial photographs, some photographs will be part of this, part of the record. It'll be kept in the city's record. If we ever have to remove it and somebody says, how big was this porch? You know, and 10 years down the road, it's twice as big. We're going to come back and look at these photos as far as a record and measure it at the time we widen the street. And if it is, and it's got to go. So from the city standpoint, it doesn't have to have an actual survey. If I was a surface owner, I would probably want that just to do two things. One is to make absolutely clear the record, and two, to protect themselves if they're going to sell that house again in the future. So.
Yeah, I'll make sure this stays with just this owner.
Well, that's going to depend on the motion that's made, because the motion could be made so that it's conditional upon current ownership or upon the structure itself. And I think that's something else that if the board is leaning towards granting some kind of encroachment that you discussed, do we want it tied to this owner or do we want it tied to the structure? And what kind of impact, what pros and cons do you have with each? Because if it's tied to the owner, then the owner doesn't need to bother getting a survey, because it's going to have to come out sooner or later if they decide to sell. But if it's tied to the structure, then the burden will be on them as opposed to the city to get that sales transaction to be completed. And there may be another cash sale, and you know, it may be the same kind of instance that we're dealing with right now, where there's not a title policy. So. But I think the next issue, if it seems like we're going to grant this, is to discuss and kind of get a feel for, do we want it tied to this owner or do we want it tied to that particular structure?
And does this and I deal with this on a daily basis from what I do. So, and does the city want payment for the encroachment?
I don't know what kind of compensation would be, you know, necessary. I think, you know, I don't know if it would be, certainly wouldn't be looked upon since it's been there, and as far as we can tell, it's probably been there, what, 20, 30 years. So it's not brand new. It's not like there's some financial gain that they're having to get this additional. And it's not like it's, we're giving them property that we wouldn't give somebody else for free. It's not a gift of anything. There's no transaction taking place of ownership. We're just saying, you're encroaching a little bit onto our property. That's okay unless we've got to come back and use that in the future. And if we do, you've got to tear that down to your cost. But until then, we're not going to, you know, we're not going to have a problem.
Okay.
So I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay. So you've heard the advice given from.
So we're saying we're not really worried about any kind of compensation.
No, you know, if the city decided to give me a new pickup, we might say, hey, that's an anti-donation issue, or you know, Porsche, whatever. So there's a
now we're in a
problem with
Porsche, okay?
There's a problem.
Yeah.
In this instance, we're not giving anything to anybody. There's no, we don't own less property. We don't own less of an easement. All we're saying is, you're going across our boundary just a little bit, and we have an easement through there. It's not that we own that property, we own a right-of-way or an easement. I think they probably pay taxes on that property out to the middle of the street. So what we're saying is, we have a right to use that, and you're infringing on that right just a little bit. But we're not presently using it, so it's okay.
Yeah.
If we are going to use it sometime in the future,
then that becomes an issue.
But we're not, there's no change in title or ownership or anything like that.
Okay.
And I'm partial to silver too.
For the owners.
Good.
Duly
noted.
Okay.
Can we do a survey before we make an
No,
amendment?
the new owner would have to tear it.
Among ourselves, can we just like do a poll? Can I ask, all right, how many of y'all, before I would
No.
make an amendment, you can't do that, that's what I'm
No,
asking.
I think you just need to discuss it and see.
Okay.
And I think somebody just needs to make that motion, and if it flies, it flies, if it doesn't.
Thank you, that's what I needed to know.
Yeah.
So you need to understand, if somebody makes a motion and it dies for a second, this continues on to the next board.
Yeah, okay, so, or someone else could make another motion if they want to do
That's
something different.
correct.
Okay, so I would make the motion that we give the variance contingent on the.
Not a variance.
Huh?
It's an encroachment.
Encroachment. Encroachment. It won't, correct me, I'm shooting from the hip here. So I make a motion that we give the encroachment, based on, that it's been pre-existing, it's been there, he's not added anything to it.
How about we grant the
What did I say? Permit? Give, oh, I'm sorry, thank you.
grant would make me feel
How about if you make the motion?
better. I can't.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, I'm already at 2 strikes, I don't wanna go for 3, you
The
know?
easy thing to do is you could say, here's the recommendation that's identified with the city. I'm moving to make that recommendation, and then all you need to do is say, in your motion, is it attached to the structure or this owner?
Okay.
That's all you have to do.
All right, I make a motion based on the recommendation as printed with the additional statement that it be attached to the owner.
I'll
There's a
second it.
motion on the floor, is there a second?
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second, is there any further discussion? If there's no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion carries. So, explain to them.
Yes, I got you. So, sí pasaron el permiso de dejar que siga ahí el porche y la estructura de las escaleras y la rampa. Lo único es de que va a ser con usted. So, si en un futuro usted vende la casa, usted tiene que decirles que esto está en contra del paseo que tiene la ciudad. Y si en un futuro llegan a expandir la carretera o cualquier cosa, se va a tener que remover esta estructura.
They need to understand very clearly that our
Más que
actions.
si mueven la estructura, cuesta que remuevan la casa, va a salir un. La casa es la que está al frente.
He's making a joke that if you end up asking to remove the whole structure, then it basically like his house is like walking into the street.
Yes.
So.
I understand that. They need to understand that our actions just move this forward to the city commission.
Yeah,
Crystal will be in touch
Okay.
with you guys with respect to
So,
what we're
ellos
doing.
lo aprobaron, so, como funciona esta comité, ellos aprueban y dan recomendaciones y se lo pasan a los comisionarios. So hasta la siguiente junta se lo van a presentar a los comisionarios y ellos van a decir que sí. Normalmente ellos están de acuerdo en lo que les recomienda porque ellos son los que están dando la recomendación y están en esa comité. So, por ahorita está aprobado, pero depende que los comisionarios también den la última
July 23rd.
And would you please let them know for sure that the recommendation does say that if that area is ever needed, it will have to be removed at his cost?
I did.
Okay.
And I told him that it was also attached to him only, so when he sold the property, he did have to disclose that information.
Mhm.
So, y la siguiente junta sería julio 23. So, nomás vienen y es lo mismo, ellos van a decir si sí o no, la pasan y ya.
That's been there.
Okay.
It was there. I went to school.
July 23rd.
Yes.
And now they've been quite a while.
I had given it.
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention, what'd you say? Or you want to
I've
talk?
lived here all my life and that's been there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, it's ridiculous to do anything different
Thank
with
you.
it than it's been there.
The Jajalito?
Yeah.
Is that what it used to be called?
Yeah, it was Recalito.
Mm-hmm.
Best burritos in the world.
Yes.
Ever.
But don't go in and eat.
Nope.
Get it and go.
Get it and go.
Get it and go.
So the next action item is a stop sign for Lovington Harrison. Crystal, is this you? Or Jen?
Is this, do we have something on this here?
I have nothing on that.
Dude, y'all are bad.
And you have everything? How come we have nothing? What package?
The one you download from the web page of them.
Download.
You see, Joel is gifted, he understands all this stuff.
It's right there.
Where?
So I picked it from
Shall
the
we?
online agenda, download agenda, and It's not on.
Get
I just got it.
I'll make it bigger.
Let's try this one.
Okay, see now. Go.
Okay.
That doesn't work.
And yours, say download.
It's not matched to this.
No.
This one.
Can we get some younger members on this board?
That's the one I'm
Thank you, Mr. City Manager,
You're
for
welcome.
changing course.
Right here.
Easy.
We need some younger friends, guys.
So,
And you go down.
so what we have is, we've received,
And this is the thing, and then you click this, and it's gonna give you a download here for the.
Okay.
several requests from individuals who live in the vicinity of 8th and Harrison to replace the yield sign with a stop sign because there's a lot of children that play there. I know that the street department has put up children at play signs throughout that area, but the residents are requesting that we replace that intersection with the stop sign in hopes that it would slow people down even further. Whenever we looked at the entire block though, if you look at Tyler and 8th, it's controlled with a yield sign. You have a four-way stop at Gore and 8th, a yield sign at Gore and 8th, and then whenever you get down to Van Buren, it's actually just a east to west stop sign, and that's a dead end. Those other two streets that have yield signs are actually through streets. So our recommendation is to just replace the signage with a two-way stop, east and west, not converting anything to four-way stops, for not only Harrison but also Tyler.
Because those are speed zones.
And I am unsure when Van Buren was actually converted over to a stop sign, or if that was originally built that way, or if somebody came in and replaced that years ago.
I think that was
Those are on east and west, running east and west?
Mhm. Yes, sir.
Stop signs.
Yes, sir.
Do we have anybody here from that area that?
But I know I've personally received 3 different phone calls from 3 different people.
So we've gone through the summary, we have nobody here to talk about it. The staff recommendation is to install, is to replace the yield signs in Tyler and Harrison with east-west stop signs.
no Tyler and Gore, wasn't it?
No, Harrison.
Oh, Harrison, yeah.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we recommend the installation of stop signs to replace the yield signs on Tyler and Harrison.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Motion carries. The next action, or the next item on the agenda is a non-action item. Facade and billboard ordinance discussion.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we visited with the city commission after receiving numerous requests from the public to preserve and enhance the aesthetics of not only the downtown area but also Main Street, really to address vacant buildings. As you're aware, we do have those vacant buildings, and sometimes, well, oftentimes they don't fill those, and if you leave something vacant for quite some time, it becomes neglected. It may be, and it doesn't really, it's not limited to a local property owner or somebody who's an absentee landowner or somebody who even lives out of state. Nothing is really immune to it. So we did the same presentation to the city commission at their last meeting in June to get their opinion on whether or not we should move forward with some type of what they call a nuisance or facade ordinance, mainly to address the nuisance buildings, because right now our code does not allow us to address those unless it's in a condemnable state, and the majority of our vacant properties downtown are not condemnable, nor does the city really want to condemn those properties. But also to discuss the proliferation of billboards in our downtown or retail, what I call our retail sector zones. So when we look at it, of course, it does reflect a negative image anytime you have a vacant or dilapidated structure. And of course, the longer it's neglected, the more expensive it takes to repair it. There's been numerous conversations and thoughts and opinions offered as far as charging a vacant building tax, but really it's not feasible. Really, I don't even know that it's legal. And all of the research that I've done in other communities in New Mexico, even to communities back east and on the West Coast, it does not work. At the same time, I know Silver City, I believe they passed some type of a vacant building type ordinance where there was a fee assessed, but basically the fee was just to cover the cost of the fire inspector to go in and check to make sure that the building was up to fire code. Was it safe? Was it going to burst into flames, essentially? But it did nothing to do with maintaining the look or the appearance outside. And what examples we have found, really it's nothing as far as, you know, an overall makeover or anything. It's just making the building look more presentable. So what we deal with is blight, and especially in our designated areas. But these codes in other communities, and I believe there's two, Raton has adopted one, and I cannot remember the other one that has adopted that. But they found that, you know, one of the motivating factors behind this is, yes, community pride. It makes things look better. It makes things more marketable from a business perspective with businesses wanting to come in. It could potentially increase building values, but also it encourages preservation. So whenever, what they have done through this is they've actually established maintenance requirements. And what these maintenance requirements do is, and I have an example of a draft, it is simply a draft ordinance that is attached to your packet that kind of outlines some of these things, but really it's got to present a safe and attractive streetscape. You can't have peeling paint, broken windows, damaged structures, you know, holes in the walls. Of course, it would reinforce the need to keep trash and debris and weeds clear of the property. Graffiti. You know, a lot of people don't realize that the city still has a graffiti removal process. Anybody in town, if they have graffiti on their home, on their fence, all they have to do is come down here to City Hall, sign a waiver. We'll go over there, we'll pressure wash it off. Now, we're not going to repaint it to match, but we'll at least get that graffiti off of there. But a lot of people don't take advantage of that. We just can't go out and do that, though. The paperwork has to be done. Landscape maintenance, also, it specifies what you can cover windows with. You know, do we want to hang up pink tarps over it? Not necessarily. What about plywood? There's limitations on window coverings. You can actually read that in the meat of the ordinance. You got to maintain your roof. So within that facade ordinance, it actually identifies a zone, which I believe I'll show you here in a minute. But also with billboards that we have, I don't know if you've noticed, but we have quite a few out there. Really what we're concerned about is within the historic downtown area. Do we really want a billboard, you know, a block to the south of the plaza area? But so we would maybe potentially look at something to where we could limit where a placement or certain design standards for billboards, or do we even allow them within a certain area of town? So what this would require, though, because we're telling people what they can and can't and what they should do with their property, it would affect zoning. So would this necessarily need a new chapter, or should we identify potentially a fourth zone, you know, an economic development or retail zone, which the draft ordinance kind of has what we had recommended, is it would encompass all of Main Street from north to south, and Avenue D basically from Main Street all the way out to 17th Street. So this was just kind of a discussion to bring forth to this body, because this is something that the City Commission would like for this body to work on, to bring them back a concept or a potential draft to consider for potential adoption in several months down the road.
Isn't some of that on Avenue D commercial, I know it's commercial, but county property?
Yes.
That's what I was thinking. I was looking at the map and I'm like, where the city, I couldn't really figure out where the city and county started.
So how does this impact existing billboards?
We don't even have any language to
Because,
incorporate
we
that
have a
right
brand
now.
new one.
Oh, we got 2 or 3 brand new ones.
17.
Really, I think that our historic area or downtown area would pretty much begin at like Avenue A and then terminate at Jefferson Avenue. It's kind of the boundaries of our traditional historic downtown district.
Right.
As far as those that are existing, you know, we had a complaint a couple of months ago with the digital one that's located just to the south of Avenue D,
My Wells Fargo.
with it being, and I'm sure those of you who've been out at night, you could get a suntan at 11 o'clock at night due to the brightness of this. It was extremely bright.
You can see it at the brand.
And just simply talking with that, but we don't have a local code on billboards all throughout town. Does the community want billboards all throughout town? That's just one of those things that we had talked about.
Well, I know on Avenue D, somewhere around 4th Street, there's a brand new one.
Yeah. And I've got permits for like 2 more down Main Street, so.
Down
they're
Main?
just- Yes, they're just wanting to, and I have no recourse to not let them do it.
Where do they want to put them on Main Street?
There's another one going in, he's got a permit for Can Autos, putting up a billboard at his property.
Oh, that's way down at this end of town.
Okay.
But it's not in the historical or,
No,
But
hopefully
the
no one
limits that-
leases property to the billboard guy there, I'm hoping.
The limits on that map would sure change that.
Is there like a night sky ordinance or something already for the
The
brightness of?
state has, state does, yes.
And do the billboards fall into that at all? I mean, because of the brightness and?
But if I may, I know when dealing with this particular issue, if it's along the state right of way, they do have some control over that, but night skies doesn't apply to those.
Yes. And that,
But Main Street would conform to that because it is on a right, I mean, that's a state highway, right?
It could, yes.
If I may, Roswell Main Street actually just enacted a light ordinance that also included some billboards. They didn't really limit billboards, and the ones that were already there, they didn't even fight it. They just let them be. Alamogordo did have a lot of pushback from the billboard companies when they tried to, but they were really harsh. So they wanted to have them all removed out of Alamogordo completely. And so there was some litigation that happened, but the city has the right to do that. So the city did win, but since it was so bitter, they kind of just left it alone in terms of doing that. So we're really asking to compromise. We're not asking for the ones to be removed or anything like that, but especially for the historic district, we really don't want to see any giant billboards that ruin the beautification of it. So those are just some of the things that we've looked at.
well, and all of the billboards that have went in along Main and D, they have been approved by DOT also, because I have to coordinate that with the state, because the state won't approve it till I approve it, but in my documents, I say I can't approve it until the state approves it, so, you know, we've been going back and forth, me and DOT on all these billboards, so they have all gotten approval
Well,
from the state through DOT.
Can you, in your discussion on approval, say, yeah, we'll approve it with the condition that it's not above a certain amount of lumens to where it interrupts the night sky?
I would need to change my code to do that.
That's
we'd have to change it.
Which
Or could
I
we
would think
even,
is part of the intent on this. So are you basically telling everybody that, look, we're building a facade and billboard ordinance and no decisions and no permits will be made until this ordinance is done?
I don't know if you could tell them that, we're not gonna do anything until, I mean, we could try maybe officially suspending it, but, that's always kind of risky because the current law, when they make their application, is such that it's still open. What I would do is if it comes into the historic area, I think we have a master plan as far as how that historic Main Street is to be developed. And if there is or isn't a provision in there for billboards, we may be able to use that and say, this you know, it's not that we're outlawing it, it's just that this doesn't conform with the plan,
Yeah.
something we already have in existence.
If we're still working off the old one, then no, there's nothing in there.
And it doesn't actually say that in the new one either in the draft. Like I said, I've gotten calls, especially after each, they're called double deckers. Those have come up and they're like, can't you do anything? And I'm like, I don't have nothing to do with that. But you know, we've gotten calls, and I know we discussed it briefly in our master plan when we were talking about actually creating an ordinance to kind of help out with some of that. But there really isn't anything to go off of right now.
So where do we go from here?
Read
Well-
your draft.
Yes, actually, review the draft. Let's be prepared to do some serious discussion direction at the next meeting, so we could actually have some type of a document to work on.
So, okay. I originally didn't see this as a P&Z action, but the way it's signed it. Okay. So, is the best thing to do to have a working session between us and the commission, or you want us just to come up with a draft and send it to them and let them find it out?
I think we need to work before we even bring the commission in, because they've received this before. They like the concept of it, but I think they've kind of given us that latitude that let's bring them back a document first, and then they can kick it back. And a little bit late. I think it's a little bit preliminary right now. That's not even the right word. To have a work session with them.
Okay.
Premature, thank you.
Premature. Okay. So, please read and comment on your drafts and get your comments back to Crystal in time for the next P&Z meeting, which means a week before the next P&Z meeting for her to be able to post it.
And if you need copies of this email, of course, you can access your Novus stuff from home at any time. Just get the website.
Can we take this and edit it? I mean, is it a Word document that we can edit?
I can send it
Print it
out.
off.
I can send
Scratch
it
it
out.
and read it.
I can send it out in a Word format.
Yeah, we can email it out.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Want to talk about this any further before we?
Well, I didn't see, I was scanning it and I didn't see the billboard. What section was the billboard?
It's not in there yet.
Okay, so anything that we think of, we should just add that as 1750131. I don't know, I just
Put your
just put it at the
comments
end.
Just put comments at the
Put
end.
it
and then we
comments
can
at
figure
the
out
end,
where to
okay.
put it.
I can do that.
Which I haven't had time to read all of this, but since you're including the roof, which is not a facade, or it's not a visible facade element, are you including any kind of making sure these buildings are up to fire code?
Basically, I believe it's on page 4 of 7, what we mentioned about the roof is that essentially the roof has to be maintained to where it doesn't leak and threaten, you know, basically any leaks that would promote mold, mildew, or any damage to adjacent structures.
Okay. So, do you guys envision an ordinance when we talk about billboards with dealing with the side of multi-story structures? So in other words, say you put a billboard and ordinance in that says from this street to this street, it's just not happening. The next thing that's going to happen is somebody's going to come in and ask the guy on the corner of Washington and Central, hey, you have a 2-story building, can I put a sign on the end of an LED sign on the second floor? And we're going to address that.
In our code, under signs and billboards, overhangs, there is things that address the big signs on the sides of buildings like that. I was trying to find it real quick.
We can, if it's not in there, we can, yeah, this would be the perfect time to
Yeah.
address it.
So in section 12.20 is your signs and billboard ordinance that we have existing.
Okay.
So,
Send that out with email so we can
okay.
all have that to glance at too and get it all going at.
Yeah,
At
and
one
that way
time.
we know what we're doing, because we may end up putting the billboard issue back into this portion, or however James wants to address it.
Okay.
We could request that the signage, with the lumens and everything, that after midnight to 5 o'clock in the morning, that the lights be turned off
Or dim.
or dim, you know? I mean, those LEDs can do just about anything. All you have to do is decrease it by 50%.
Okay.
But if the light issue is an issue, I mean, we're going to rectify the situation.
Is there anything else that y'all want to discuss on this? If not, I'm call for a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion that we adjourn the meeting.
A second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.